Zach, this is our first episode since Taylor wore the gold bodysuit in Miami. We're going to break it all down next.
I don't know what any of that means. It's time for another D3 Datacast. I'm Zach Snyder, joined by Matt Snyder, and we have officially made it through the offseason as of this episode. We're going to talk about actual games, and the next time you see us, we will be dropping our week one show. It will be officially season time. We've been in season with weekly episodes here for a while now, but it's really official.
Yeah, we're going to do our week one picks. We're going to do games of the week, all the fun stuff we normally do, mailbag section. So, what can people expect next week, Zach?
Well, one of the things we did for our week one show last year that we're going to bring back is we want to solicit hot takes and bold opinions like bold predictions from the Division 3 basketball community. If there's something you have some sort of burning feeling about this upcoming season, let us know. We'd love to feature that in the show. Lots of ways to get in touch with us. You can email us at d3datacast@gmail.com. We're on social media, Twitter X at D3Datacast, Facebook.com/D3Datacast. If you're watching this show, you probably know how to get in touch with us. So we want to hear those hot takes, those bold predictions. Let us know, and we'll go over them in next week's week one show.
Yeah, hit subscribe, hit a comment below, and that's how you can get in contact with us as well.
We mentioned that we're talking about actual games, Matt. This has become another staple for us as we get into the season. The calendar is about to turn to November. And so to get those basketball juices flowing, we like to look at 50 games, what we consider maybe the top 50 games just in that first calendar month of the Division 3 basketball season, the top 50 games as we see it in November. Now, we have a few caveats, a few ways we like to shape those top 50 games that we talk about here, Matt. Bring us through it.
Yeah, one thing we're going to only look at is non-conference games. So what's really fun about November is there's not a lot of conference play. Teams are going out and scheduling opponents, maybe flying across the country for a tournament, maybe attending an event like the Great Lakes Invitational. So we really love, if possible, non-conference games to watch out for in November. I think there's another caveat as well, and I will come up with it at some point.
As you mentioned, there's a lot of great events around the country. Some of these are classics where we know the pairings ahead of time. Some of them are real like 4-team tournaments, so we don't necessarily know what those, day two pairings are going to be. So in some cases, we know that there's probably going to be some other great matchups, but it depends on who wins that first day. And so we're not projecting any weekend tournament championship games or consolation games. In some cases, those will be great games as well.
That was the other caveat. Thanks for grabbing that one for me.
So let's jump right in, Matt. First game of the slate here, November 8th. Yeshiva travels to Ohio to take on Mount Union, and this is a fun one because not only is this an opening day game, but it is truly an opening day game. This is slated for a noon tip-off.
Yeah, November 8th, I believe, is a Friday. So, of course, Yeshiva at sundown does their Sabbath celebrations and observations. So, they're going to want to play earlier, get back to the hotel so they can do that stuff as a team. So, this is an early tip off. So, all you D3 fans, this is great for your calendar. Hopefully, you can have a little lunchtime, go out to the sports bar and watch this game. They'll have it on the big screen. Also fun to get Yeshiva further west out into Ohio here. They're going to play a couple games this opening weekend. Really fun to see them match up against a team like Mount Union. We picked Yeshiva as a Skyline favorite in our conference champions draft. Mount Union might not be the favorite in their conference right now, but they are also a very strong team, a team that could make the NCAA tournament nonetheless. So I think this is a really fun matchup for Division 3 fans to see.
Some more fun matchups will take place at Illinois Wesleyan. Matt, two games to highlight there to be played Friday, November 8th, starting with Cal Lutheran taking on Illinois Wesleyan, the host of the SICMA Invitational. And they will play the first game of the day there at the SICMA. What do you think about Calu against Illinois Wesleyan?
Yeah, going to be a great tournament. We're going to get the next game next. Four teams that won their conference last year. Four teams that are all in the top 25 poll. I'm pretty sure they were all finished inside the top 25 there. Cal Lutheran, Illinois Wesleyan, going to be a great game. That's the early game there at Illinois Wesleyan at the SICMA. Two teams that you figure we're going to be talking about in February and what are their Pool C chances or their Pool A chances even getting into the tournament. So a great sneak peek of what could be the type of matchup we will see in March.
And then capping off the first night of the SICMA Invitational there, Matt, UW Platteville, the preseason number 2 takes on Calvin, preseason number 9, top 10, top 25 matchup there.
Yeah, preseason top 25 poll not matching up perfectly with our episodes this week. I often will show my ballots on our episodes. We will get into that into the season, but I did vote as UW Platteville as my number 1 team this year. Definitely understand that they're going to be in that 1, 2, 3 mix. They landed number 2. Calvin, I think we saw come in at number 9, so a top 10 matchup right from the jump here. It's just going to be great. Again, teams that have played each other, Wisconsin and Michigan, kind of regional rivals. They played in the non-conference last year in a tournament at Shrine. Just the great types of matchups that we see. Competitive teams hoping that they can be a factor in their league, teams that might, or in UW Platteville's case, as a number 2 team, an early kind of favorite as it were, to reach the Final Four. A team that was in the Elite Eight on the doorstep of the Final Four last year. Calvin also in the Elite Eight last year. Just a really fun matchup, and it's one that voters are going to be watching for sure in kind of shaping their top 10s as we look from the preseason ballot into kind of later November, that first kind of in-season ballot that we'll get.
And this is a true tournament, so we're guaranteed a banger in the SICMA championship game as well as the consolation game, but just have to see what happens Friday night there to know exactly what those matchups are going to be. All right, moving on for a game taking place at Shrine as part of the Steve Green Classic that they host. Mary Hardin-Baylor traveling up from Texas to take on the host Thunder.
Yeah, really fun tournament that Shrine has organized here right away on opening weekend. Shrine, of course, the defending national champs, so you got to get them in right away as soon as possible. But Mary Hardin-Baylor, a fun matchup. They figure to be in the mix probably in the shrinking ASC conference. They're probably one of the favorites, one of the 2 favorites in that conference. They've been in a lot of NCAA tournaments historically and recently. So what can Mary Hardin-Baylor do right up against the defending national champion who returns a whole bunch? I think Shrine is the preseason number 1, so it's going to be a tough test for Mary Hardin-Baylor. Also kind of a cool coaching matchup. Brooks Miller and Cliff Carroll, they have some coaching history together, as well as they were both part of Bobby Knight's staffs, right? I think that was true. So a good matchup here for Mary Hardin-Baylor and Shrine, and just fun to see Indiana and Texas match up.
All right, our second slide here, another Texas one here, Matt. Bethany Lutheran will be playing Trinity of Texas in a game that will be played at Colorado College. We'll say this up front. Trinity appears a few times. It's a very interesting schedule for them. They're very heavy on the road and neutral games. I don't believe they play. I'm trying to look. They don't play a home game until they host their own tournament or classic December 20th.
Yeah, they're one of the couple teams that immediately stuck out from me just trying to comb through early season games as they're getting out. They're playing games, especially away from home, as you said, playing good matchups, quality matchups. Bethany Lutheran was a team that we saw in the tournament last year. Trinity, Texas started out last year red hot, maybe faded a little bit in February into March and had an earlier tournament exit than maybe a lot of us expected. But this is a good matchup, and when you're getting the UMAC, the upper Midwest, and a team from Texas, San Antonio, that's just kind of a fun D3 matchup that you don't get through the whole season. That's why these early season games are great matchups. And at a neutral site at Colorado College, that just kind of makes it even more fun.
Absolutely. And Bethany Lutheran's a program that seems to have really risen above the pack there in the UMAC. So playing this type of game is a real good kind of measuring stick game for their program. All right, still November 8th, Matt. Here, this is an action-packed opening day. Elmhurst will take on Wisconsin Lutheran. Wisconsin Lutheran getting a lot of respect. Yeah. They're in the top 25 here to start the season, and I imagine this is one of those games that voters are really going to be looking at to see how Wisconsin Lutheran performs against a team like Elmhurst.
Yeah, Zach, you and I have spent a lot of the offseason looking at and talking about NPI. And with the NPI system, regional rankings is going to kind of go out the window to a large degree. But I still see this game as kind of like a potential changing of the guard in that Region 8 type area. Wisconsin Lutheran returns a ton from a team that was in the NCAA tournament last year, took Wash U all the way to the brink on the road in overtime, I believe. A game that they looked very competitive. That whole team comes back. They're kind of in the middle of the pack in the top 25. Elmhurst has had a great run. They were in the Final Four a few years back. They were in the tournament last year. They've been kind of at or toward the top of the CCIW for a while now. I don't think they're going away, but they did graduate a good amount of talent last year. They're going to bring some more in. So is this a game that is kind of like a Region 8 changing of the guard? Can a team like Wisconsin Lutheran top one of the recent top teams in the CCIW? This is a great game. You used the term measuring stick earlier for Wisconsin Lutheran right from the go against the CCIW. We're going to kind of see, maybe what they're made out of. And for Elmhurst, right? They're maybe the untested team of the two, and Wisconsin Lutheran is the big veteran group. So what does Elmhurst have to go as well?
Mary Hardin Baylor will play Heidelberg. Again, this will be a neutral court game. It's at Trine as another game in that Steve Green Classic.
Yeah, Heidelberg out of the OAC, one of the strong kind of power conferences in Division III. Usually that's a strong and deep league. We already talked about Mount Union. We're going to talk a fair bit this whole season about John Carroll. Heidelberg has been in that mix as a team that has been kind of on the Pool C fringes for the last couple of years. What's the continued momentum and direction of that program? That'll be interesting to see here. Another cool test for Mary Hardin Baylor, kind of this ASC OAC matchup, is one that it's probably would have been like super tremendous 2 years ago. Now the ASC has shrunk in membership, so it's not quite as sexy of a matchup between two conferences as maybe it would have been. But it's still two good teams, two good programs, teams that are definitely kind of in that top 100 mix. And again, just fun to see Ohio and Texas meeting here in Indiana on a neutral court in a preseason tournament.
All right, didn't take us long to get to the defending national champions, and now to the defending national runner-up. Hampton-Sydney plays a November 9 game at Swarthmore.
Yeah, Hampton-Sydney, Swarthmore, just two teams that have been all over the national conversation the last couple of years. Hampton-Sydney, as you mentioned, national runner-up, so obviously in the Final Four last year. Swarthmore was in the Final Four the previous year. They were also in the tournament, won a tournament game last year. We talk about Division III Blue Bloods. These are two of the programs that have both historical success and recent success in Division III. And to get a day 2 matchup between Hampton-Sydney and Swarthmore, that's just the kind of stuff that gets our blood pumping about Division III basketball. Both just kind of the historical context of a matchup like this, and then also to see these two specific teams, what do they bring back? We know Hampton-Sydney does bring back Adam Brazel, but they lose Davison Hubbard, who is going to play a grad year at Baylor. A bunch of other players on that roster do turn over. So what does Hampton-Sydney bring back from a team that looked really strong in the ODAC and was one of like the top 2 teams in the country all season long?
Eastern will play Roanoke. This game will be at Shenandoah as part of the tip-off classic there. Matt, I know you're real high on Roanoke going into the year, and Eastern's another interesting team to watch. You could say that maybe by the end of the year last year, there was a trio of MAC Commonwealth teams, and they might have been playing the best out of all three.
Yeah, they were definitely I don't want to say an afterthought during most of the season, but they had just a heck of a run in February through that conference tournament and into the NCAA tournament. Eastern was playing just about as hot as anyone entering March. So they're exciting to me as kind of like a watch list type team, top 25 watch list. What is Eastern bringing back? Can they carry any of that momentum into this season? And Roanoke, I think, was a team that was kind of on the younger side last year and was trying to break into that upper echelon of the ODAC, but that was such a deep and tough league, especially last year, that it was difficult to do. But they're an interesting team to me too. In my top 25 deliberations, just like what does Roanoke bring back? They have the ability this year to take that next step forward and challenge those Guilfords, Randolph Macons, Hampton-Sydneys, who were kind of the top tier last year. I think maybe they could be a team that's looking for kind of that Pool C, if not challenging for the league title right now. So love this matchup, Eastern versus Roanoke, day 2. Love this for Division III.
And a great D3 Indiana basketball matchup here with Wabash and Trine wrapping up the Steve Green Classic hosted by Trine. So this is a true road game for Wabash.
Yeah, I talk about how I love kind of like intra-regional or cross-state games in November. But this is kind of a fun in-state matchup between teams in different conferences that maybe don't play each other every year. But Wabash versus Trine, Wabash has been one of those teams in the NCAA that has been winning the league or getting to the tournament final there. Wabash was another team that was in the Final Four 2 seasons ago, or maybe we're calling it 3 seasons ago now. Trine was there last year. So recent success for these two programs in Indiana. Basketball state, we know. As a second day of this Steve Green Classic at Trine, just kind of a really fun Division III matchup, a fun Indiana matchup here between Wabash and Trine.
And a second game here in Ohio for Yeshiva, Matt. Another really interesting matchup as Yeshiva goes to Wooster.
Yeah, so they're going to play Mount Union on Friday at noon. They're going to take Saturday off, and then Sunday, Yeshiva versus Wooster in Ohio as well. So again, another one of those fun matchups. This time against an NCAC opponent. Wooster has been kind of historically one of those top teams in Division III. Maybe they've taken a step back the last few seasons. They're probably looking to get back on that. Back into the national picture, definitely one of the favorites in the NCAC. So another good measuring stick game for both Yeshiva and Wooster against how do they compare to other kind of conference type favorites around the country.
Yeah, the MAC's going to find out what that Ohio Riz is all about. All right, moving on. Nebraska Wesleyan will take on UW La Crosse on the 10th. This is part of the tip-off tournament hosted at UW Eau Claire. A couple really interesting teams, Matt. Nebraska Wesleyan was going to be my surprisingly clear favorite at the top of the ARC after that, muddled mix from a year ago. And they do return a lot, but importantly, they do not return Peter Lash, who is out for the year. I'm trying to recover from a knee injury. We'll see what his basketball future holds. And UW La Crosse, Matt, struck me as a team that really got better over the course of the season, but just the way that the WIAC picture played out maybe wasn't recognized nationally. So really interested to see what we see out of La Crosse this year.
Yeah, we're going to rightfully talk a lot about UW Platteville in the early season. They're getting a lot of favorite. I expect them to be great, but don't overlook a team like UW La Crosse in the WIAC. I think they're a team. I looked at them for my top 25 ballot as well. They're going to be on my watch list. They have an opportunity with some of their early season games. I think this is probably not the only time we will see UW La Crosse on this list, but they have a lot of opportunities to prove themselves as kind of back on the national stage. And Nebraska Wesleyan, they had a great tournament run last year. That top like 4 or 5 in the American Rivers was crazy. Nebraska Wesleyan got into the second weekend of the tournament. They kind of had a near Final Four opportunity of their own last year. So I expect them to be good. I had ranked them inside of my top 25. So this is going to be a great Region 9 matchup here.
Shifting back a little bit further east, Matt, Rowan will meet NYU as part of the Tip-Off Classic hosted there by New York University.
Yeah, the NJAC will be and is always just crazy. I love that league. It's a fun league to watch just because anything can happen on any night. We saw Rowan be a tournament team last year from the NJAC. Didn't win the NJAC tournament, but I think they were the regular season champs a year ago, or maybe shared a regular season champ. This is what happens when I try to remember stuff just off the top of my head that I haven't really looked at. So a good game, a good test for them against NYU. NYU loses the National Player of the Year, right? And so they're going to have a chunk to replace. I think they have a bunch back. They've been one of those teams that are kind of on that transfer train as well, like grad student type players. They have more in the mix as well. So just kind of a good like New York, New Jersey regional-ish. Not like literally they're in the same region, but like actually, are they both in Region 4? But anyway, regardless, the regions are not going to matter this year. But it's just a fun game and a good measuring stick for both programs who've had a lot of success, have had NCAA tournament opportunities recently, and what are they both going to be this season?
Both teams that really seem to be able to reload by bringing in transfers, and so good opportunity to see maybe how that mix is going to fare this year, matching up against each other. All right, now to a Georgia matchup here, Matt. Barry will play at Emory.
Yeah, really interested to see Barry. They're having a coaching change this year, so what does that do to the program dynamic? They had a pretty strong player transfer, I believe, if I'm remembering my rosters correctly as well. And Emory is a team that brings back almost everyone. They were a pretty young team last year. They're getting top 10 consideration. So is this a game that Emory is just going to win because they're the team with the experience, or is Barry still going to be able to hang with a team like Emory? And is Barry going to be a team in the SAA that's going to be competitive for their league championship and then for like NCAA tournament spots this year?
Western New England will take on Brandeis. Matt, Brandeis is a team that a lot of people think is one to watch in the UAA. You know, they've kind of been stuck maybe in that bottom half, but they're a team that I don't think anyone would be surprised if we're able to jump up this year.
Yeah, and a reminder that bottom half of the UAA means you're probably still like in the top 25% of Division 3, and that's
Right.
what Brandeis has been, but that's just such a tough league that you take your lumps even if you are overall a good team. This is a matchup with Western New England. Under the old system, we would have kind of salivated at with like a region 2 type implications. Um, Brandeis has been a team breaking into that regional rankings. Western New England in the CNE this year, I think, is potentially able to challenge for the title there. We've seen like teams like Nichols kind of dominate there more in recent years. But is Western New England a team that can break through? I think maybe yes. So they're definitely a team that I would like to watch. And a game like this against the UAA and Brandeis, I think, is one of those good measuring stick type games to see where both of these teams are kind of in that regional picture there.
And another team I think looking to break through, Matt, here is Clark. They'll be taking on St. Joseph, Connecticut. They played a couple really high profile games. Speaking about Clark, out in Vegas last year, came up short to Trinity, Texas, and Case Western Reserve as they're looking to take another step. A game against a team like St. Joseph, who's been really in the national picture the last couple years, is one to highlight here in November. This one will take place on November 13th.
Yeah, one thing I really like about Clark the last few years is they haven't been afraid to schedule these types of games, right? You mentioned some of the games they played last year. This game against St. Joseph, just kind of right off the bat, is a great one as well. One that's going to be a test for them, let them know where they are. And I feel like St. Joseph is now a program that has the continued depth, the continued consistency of one of the stronger programs in the country. That whole they haven't had a men's team there for that long. What has it been like 10 years or something like that? I don't know exactly what it is, but they've been strong and they've kind of now been able to replace as players kind of graduate through the program. They've been able to replace those programs. We've been talking about teams like Randolph Macon for a few years now. Like, when is the drop off going to come? I feel like St. Joseph is almost the same in my mind. Like, when's the drop off going to come? And at a certain point, you just say, like, maybe there's not a drop off. And can they just keep that train rolling? We know the GNAC, their conference isn't the strongest league in the country. They have a couple of challengers in there, but it's non-conference games like this that give us the ability to say that they can continue to compete on a national level. And a Clark-St. Joseph matchup is between teams who really have programs that have hopes on, hey, we should be making the NCAA tournament. That's how we feel we're that strong. We want to prove ourselves in games like this.
All right, sticking on November 13th, St. John Fisher takes on Hobart.
Yeah, a nice like upstate New York matchup here. St. John Fisher and Hobart Empire 8 versus Liberty League. Just like a kind of a great bragging rights games. Teams that always have their sights on, can we break into that national picture here? Can we stay in the national picture here? And I think a winner of a team like this might kind of put their stamp on we are a team to watch in Region 3, right? And to kind of claim not necessarily supremacy in that region, but to declare themselves kind of one of the teams in the upper echelon there, kind of in that New York State region.
All right, we got Randolph Macon against Hampton Sydney next here, Matt. And I know we said at the top that we weren't doing conference games, but there's a loophole here, you know, with the way that ODAC scheduling works, where you play everyone 3 times over the course of 2 years. That means you don't play everyone twice, and so that means there's only one conference game from time to time between rivals like Hampton Sydney and Randolph Macon are. Fortunately, a lot of times these teams will play that second game, but it gets played as a non-conference game, and that's what we see here when Randolph-Macon travels to Hampton-Sydney on November 13th.
Yeah, we see some teams like in the NESCAC schedule extra games against rivals as well. Randolph-Macon and Hampton-Sydney always make sure to play twice, even when the conference schedule doesn't dictate. They use one of their non-conference games to play that, so they get the true home and home. It is one of kind of the top rivalries in Division III. If you were going to make a list, Randolph-Macon versus Hampton-Sydney, they don't like each other. I think Hampton-Sydney's win last year at Randolph-Macon was they like broke a really long streak of not being able to win at Randolph-Macon, if I'm remembering all of that correctly. So this is a big rivalry. This is a big, like, these two teams are going to play in ODAC play. They might meet in the ODAC tournament. You know, you always think they could meet in the national tournament, right, on a second or third or weekend or something like that. We saw two ODACs in the Final Four last year, so it's a conference that can do that kind of a thing. But to get this like right away, second week of the season is going to be fun and it's going to be intense.
Montclair State will play Albertus Magnus. Matt, you mentioned St. Joseph there in the GNAC. Albertus is the team that's really emerged as the primary challenger there to St. Joseph in the GNAC. Good early season game for them against Montclair State.
Yeah, and I probably unintentionally threw some shade at the GNAC earlier. And teams like St. Joseph and Albertus don't deserve any shade, right? They are teams that have had success. They've had success on the national stage. Albertus Magnus was a team last year that was right in that Pool C conversation down to the very end. You know, we were trying to do like Pool C projections last year, and they're one of those teams that was in the mix. It's like Connecticut College, it's Albertus Magnus, it's Illinois Wesleyan, it's whatever other teams we were talking for about those like those last 2 or 3 Pool C picks. They were right there in the mix. So that program has built themselves into a position where they are on the national stage, they are winning games, and they are trying to break into the tournament, right? Regardless of just winning your Pool A or just beating St. Joseph, they want to stand on their own 2 legs, and I think Albertus Magnus can do that. A matchup with Montclair State, a team that's really always in the mix in the NJAC. Like that top 4 in the NJAC is always just crazy. Montclair State, I think, more as likely as not, has been in that mix. So this will be a good test for Albertus Magnus. Playing a team that's in a conference that's like a tier or 2 above their own. I think that's a strong matchup for both these teams.
It seems like you can always count on Christopher Newport to play some really interesting ODAC games as part of their non-conference, although technically as a C2C member, everything for them is non-conference. But here we get one with the captains taking on Virginia Wesleyan.
Yeah, this is also probably just a really cool local matchup for these two teams. It's only, like 25 miles probably from Newport News to Virginia Beach. So on the east coast of Virginia here, these two teams that are always in the national mix, 2 teams that have been to Final Fours, 2 teams that were in the NCAA tournament just last year, right? So a great Virginia matchup, a great non-conference matchup, and one that has kind of like regional implications, but also national implications, because these 2 teams, whoever wins or loses, is probably going to cause echoes in the top 25.
Okay, now a meeting of 2 teams we already talked about, Matt, but an interesting matchup for the reasons that we talked about individually in their other games here. Eastern will play Rowan on November 13th.
Yeah, and to me, this matchup sticks out as just one that you could definitely see in March. We wouldn't be surprised if a bracket came out on any random year and it's like Eastern versus Rowan, a first or second round matchup there somewhere on the East Coast. 2 programs that I think are both kind of steady on the tracks or have recently gotten themselves steady on the tracks. 2 programs that you expect to feature strongly when you get into February regional ranking time. They're both going to be in the mix, in the MAC and in the NJAC. So just a really fun matchup, and an early season game like this kind of sets what's the trajectory of both these teams going to be, and the winner is going to be like in the national picture, and the loser is going to be trying to see like how can we get back into that mix.
Really interesting one here, Matt. Drew takes on Farmingdale State on November 13th. Drew is a team a lot of people are looking at to possibly unseat Catholic there at the top of the landmark.
Yeah, admittedly, if you showed me this matchup 2 years ago, I would say let's get this one off the list. Farmingdale State has had at least 2 really good seasons in a row. Nearly was in the NCAA tournament both years, right? Has been kind of really staked their claim in the skyline after kind of Yeshiva was on top of that league and then kind of fell off a little bit. Farmingdale took the rise. Farmingdale won like 22 games or something last year, whatever the number was. They were really good. Drew looked impressive at the end of the season. We talked about that big win against Catholic. Catholic loses a whole bunch. Drew returns a whole bunch of players from last year. They're like one of the favorites in the landmark right now. So Farmingdale does lose a bunch of players who maybe played on those last two kind of like Skyline champion teams. So what is that program going to bring back? We expect them to be a factor to still be among the top teams in the Skyline, but to get a kind of early season test between these two sides will maybe kind of paint the picture of what we expect them to be kind of going down the stretch here into December and into the new year.
I like this next one, Matt, because it's Mary Washington against Maryville and being played at Marietta, part of the Shrine tournament there hosted by Marietta.
Yeah, and not just fun for the naming sense. I think this is actually going to be a really good game. We've seen Mary Washington. They played, in my mind, one of the toughest schedules in Division III last year. And even though they lost a bunch of those games, they were competitive in a whole bunch. So they were a team that the computer ratings really liked a lot better than their record because they were playing close games with whoever it was, like Randolph Macon and Christopher Newport down the stretch. And so it's games like this against Maryville, teams that are kind of in that Region 6 zone. Both these teams are looking to break through and get some of those victories against those good programs. I know Maryville's kind of been disappointed a little bit that they had in the old system had featured kind of just outside of the regional rankings, and that was such a deep region. Maybe a new system like NPI gives them a little bit. Not that they were getting an unfair shot last year, but with the way the regional rankings worked and there only being 7 spots in Region 6, it was just so tough to break in. I wonder if we will see a team like Maryville kind of feature more highly on the national stage this year for multiple reasons. One, it's a good program. I think they have had recent success. They've been the favorite or one of the favorites in the CCS for a couple of years now. But if NPI will also allow them their results to maybe shine a little bit more brightly than the old regionally ranked opponent system did.
Right. Maryville's a program that has consistently sought to schedule difficult non-conference games, but they're the CCS conference schedule. Every time they're playing a team in conference, their overall strength of schedule has been dragged down. So interesting to see how against how they perform against another good non-conference slate, and then maybe how they come out in the wash there compared to previous years. Okay, Matt, another NJAC and another landmark here. Stockton takes on Catholic. This will be played at Widener, part of the tip-off tournament hosted by Widener.
Yeah, 2 teams here that had success last year, both tournament teams. We remember Stockton being kind of that surprise final Pool C team. I think we heard tell that like they weren't even really watching the selection show because they figured we're probably just out. Their record wasn't the strongest, but they got in the NCAA tournament. Catholic was obviously in the NCAA tournament last year as well. They were hosting games, but 2 teams I don't quite know what to make of this year. So I would like to see a matchup like this to say like, how do they look? How do they look against other teams that have been historically strong, even if a little bit unknown this year? I already talked a bunch about the NJAC being kind of fun year in and year out. Stockton's been one of those teams that's featured in the top half of the NJAC. And I think if you're in the top half of the NJAC, you had at least historically been in kind of that NCAA tournament mix. So really fun game. Kind of a game, it's a matchup. We could get to the end of the year and say, what were we doing, including Stockton and Catholic? Maybe neither one caught fire or caught on, or they could both be great. And it's like, glad that we watched them early on. So it's an early season matchup like this to find out, what do we think these teams are made of? Are they a team to keep watching as the season goes on?
All right, then we have the other 2 teams in the Shrine tournament. Matt, UW Eau Claire will take on host Marietta.
Yeah, UW Eau Claire is a team that has kind of been, I don't know exactly, but like 4th fiddle in the WIAC the last few years, and that means they're a really strong team, but they don't really get the opportunity for as many wins because that's a strong and deep conference, or really to be on the national stage. They're maybe in and out of the regional rankings the last couple of years. Marietta, after their Final Four run, which is now 3 years ago, has kind of been in that similar place, 3rd or 4th in the OAC for a little while too. Both teams that really want to break on more of the national stage. Kind of a fun Ohio-Wisconsin matchup here, 2 really strong leagues. You're always talking about the WIAC, you're always talking about the OAC. So even if you can get down to like the 3rd or 4th or whatever place teams in those conferences, you still have a really strong matchup. You still have a really fun matchup. And it's again, games like this that make November so much fun for us.
Another fun one here, Matt, with Central taking on St. John's, a team I think we expect to once again be in the mix in the American Rivers Conference, and then the team that I think we both consider the favorites in the MIAC.
Yeah, I think St. John's, again, I mentioned this on our Champions Draft episode, which was a fun one. St. John's, once digging through rosters that were posted, they returned a few more players than I thought they might, just because you never know, like in the extra fifth year COVID year that's still going on, who's going to return, who was listed as a senior last year. St. John's does have a lot of those players back. I think Central's still going to be an interesting team. They do lose some from a team that was right in that ARC mix, the ARC. Sorry, they don't like to say ARC, the ARC mix last year, but could still factor in as well. I know like Ryan Scott has said, like, don't write off Central. So really fun to see in that Region 9 space, Minnesota and Iowa, kind of what this matchup looks like. Is St. John's maybe as strong as we're giving them credit for this year? Is Central a team that's still going to be right in the mix with teams like that as well? So fun Region 9 matchup there.
Back down to Texas, Matt. St. Thomas will take on Hardin-Simmons. St. Thomas, a program that has been right there in the SCAC mix from the moment they joined Division III. Hardin-Simmons, one of those teams that you could take four of those teams in the American Southwest, spin a wheel, and you might be right. I mean, it's not a clear picture of what's going to happen in the ASC, and this is the type of game that maybe helps set some expectations.
Yeah, I don't know if we've seen an ASC coaches poll or not. I kind of expect maybe Hardin-Simmons to be at least the default pick there, but I think they're going to be in the top 4 in the ASC this season, and no matter what happens, I think for sure. I don't know if there really exists like a SCAC versus ASC kind of Texas rivalry, but in my head there exists one of those. So I like to see St. Thomas, like a team that you said has been right in the SCAC mix with Hardin-Simmons, who's also like usually one of the kind of the top 2 or 3 teams in the ASC, who's going to come out of that for like head-to-head league supremacy there. And when you get into kind of tournament time and you're looking at the Texas region, we're usually looking for a host, maybe 2 hosts. But if you and your conference can win matchups like this, that maybe gives you a little bit of advantage of maybe those games are going to be at our place and not at your place. So I think even a game like this on November 15 can affect how the bracket looks in March if these 2 teams both end up strong.
Amherst will play Western Connecticut at WPI, the Ted Coughlin tournament hosted there by WPI. An interesting matchup, Matt. Maybe not immediately a top game, but one that I think will be very instructive about maybe how these 2 teams' seasons could go.
Yeah, Amherst has definitely dropped a tier or 2 in the NESCAC pecking order. They really haven't been, I don't want to say they haven't been relevant for the last couple of years, because they've been a team that can give other teams trouble. But they're a team that thinks, hey, historically, we should be like in Final Fours and winning national championships. We know David Hickson is no longer the head coach there. He got inducted into the Hall of Fame last year. But Amherst is still a program with tradition. They're a program that probably wants to be on the rise in the NESCAC. They're still a nationally known name. And the other team here in this matchup, Western Connecticut, has had to play understudy to Keene State in the LEC for the last couple of years. They've been kind of the lone challenger, the lone team that can kind of reach up and maybe knock off a Keene State the last couple of years. I think Western Connecticut's maybe sick of that. They say, hey, we should be on top of the LEC. We should be on the rise here. So I like this matchup. As you said, it's kind of instructive on maybe where these teams are headed in their respective conferences in that Region 1 and Region 2 area. Hey, can Amherst break back into that kind of NESCAC mix? If you're in like the top 4 of the NESCAC, you're probably a tournament team. You might be a team that could get to the Sweet 16. If you can beat Keene State, right? If you can win the LEC, then you're a team that can maybe host NCAA tournament games as well. You're maybe breaking into that top 25, top 16 range of Division III. I think Western Connecticut wants to get back into that top 25 mix. So I'm really interested in this kind of matchup here.
Another NESCAC team involved here, Matt. Alberta's Magnus will play Trinity of Connecticut November 16th. This will be a neutral court game as these 2 teams are taking part in the tournament hosted by Mass Dartmouth.
Yeah, we already talked a little bit about Alberta's Magnus. I think they're a team that could be in the mix in the GNAC to give St. Joseph a bunch of trouble there. Alberta's Magnus could win that league, I think. We'll have to see how things go. Trinity was a team we saw in the Final Four last year, had a really strong season out of the NESCAC. So a great and they lose some as most teams do, graduate some from that tournament team, bring some players back. I think they're going to be a strong team as well. I think they're right in the mix, maybe one of the two favorites in the NESCAC. I don't know if that's fair to say. Definitely a team that was on my list. I think I picked them. Did I pick Trinity, Connecticut in the Champions Draft? So I'm going to say that they're the NESCAC favorite, even though that might not be everyone else's pick. But a game against Alberta's Magnus, great test for both teams to see where they are. Trinity's trying to break back into that kind of top 4 national picture, kind of where a spot they enjoyed last year. And Alberta's trying to stake their claim as a team in the national mix as well.
And hopefully indicative that Trinity's playing a better non-conference schedule than they played a year ago. Of course, they got off to a hot start, but there was a lot of but who have they played? So interesting game here for Alberta's Magnus and Trinity. All right, going to what's historically been a really interesting game as far as the Region 6 mix with Guilford playing Emory on November 16.
Yeah, D3 bracket heads know that Guilford and Emory can get to each other within 500 miles. That's not applicable here, but just come tournament time, you always know that. Guilford's a team, as I was doing my voting for the top 25, I didn't know what to make of. They were great last year. They were in the Final Four. They graduate a lot of guys. But then they do have a guy coming in, I think, from Division One that's supposed to be really good, a guy who played rotation minutes in Division One and scored points. So what does that mean? Guilford's also a program that I think just can turn guys over and find the next wave of talent and coach them up. So I expect Guilford to be strong, but this is a measuring stick game for them. Already mentioned Emory. I think they return a bunch. Most of last year's team that was for much of the year in kind of the top 25 conversation, I think maybe fell out toward the end, but was still fairly young last year. And I expect them to be in kind of a top 10 mix this year. So great to see if Emory is actually performing at that level. And has Guilford found the next wave to make this year as successful, or maybe not as successful as last year, because that was a Final Four year, but one that will get them back into the tournament or back into the ODAC mix.
We already talked about Christopher Newport taking on those ODACs. Matt, Hampton-Sydney will travel to Christopher Newport this season. Of course, one of the real highlights right out of the gate last year, Christopher Newport, as defending national champions, went to Hampton-Sydney. Hampton-Sydney really burst on the scene by taking care of the captains in a really cool scene, really cool atmosphere there at Hampton-Sydney. So looking forward to this matchup.
Yeah, a really good one. Like you said, it was opening night last year, still really early in the season this year. Christopher Newport playing in the Coast to Coast Conference doesn't ever technically get any conference games. So they're playing almost anyone and everyone that they can. They love to play ODACs if possible. Virginia Wesleyan, we already saw Hampton-Sydney here. Those are all difficult games, the types of games that give Christopher Newport a strong resume come tournament time. They like to be in that hosting mix, in that kind of top 16 or top 8 mix. I voted for them preseason in the top 5, I believe. So I think they're going to be really strong. They return a surprising amount of talent, given how their roster has kind of maybe already turned over some from their national championship 2 years ago. But still that they have a lot of experience back still, and a lot of key contributors for a team that made kind of a surprisingly deep tournament run last season, given where they were maybe in the middle of the season.
November 20, we have another one of those interesting non-conference in-state games between Carthage and UW-Platteville.
I think we're all convinced that UW-Platteville is going to be good. I think the question is just how good are they going to be? Carthage, there's a little bit more of a question about that, but I think they are in the mix in the CCIW. That's a strong conference. I think the CCIW is maybe back on the rise a little bit, going back towards that upper echelon. I mean, they were not really ever out of the upper echelon of Division III, but being back like we are a top 3 conference type of a thing. And Carthage is a team I think people are talking about as could be a challenger for the CCIW title. A game like this is... Are they going to stay competitive with UW-Platteville, and can they maybe knock off a UW-Platteville team? I think it's going to be a good game, maybe a surprisingly good game, considering where the two teams finished last year. Platteville in the Elite Eight, Carthage not really being in the tournament, and by the end weren't really like in that mix necessarily, although they were pesky in the CCIW. So what can Carthage be this year?
November 21, we'll see Randolph take on Mary Washington in what is always an interesting game. Mary Washington, one of those teams that has been able to get a win over Randolph-Macon in this, whatever year stretch where very few have been able to.
Yeah, and can Randolph-Macon keep the ODAC gravy train going? I think they've won like every title since 2018 in that conference. Even last year when Hampton-Sydney was getting most of the national love, last year Randolph-Macon won that league. Mary Washington, another coast-to-coast team in Virginia that loves to play ODACs if possible as they fill up that schedule. Always a good game when these two teams match up, and I expect November 21st to be another great one as well.
All right, I think we get the Northwest Conference in this list for the first time with Whitworth, Matt. They will take on Cal Lutheran on November 21st.
Yeah, fairly recently it's been, which Whit is going to win the Northwest Conference? Is it Whitworth or is it Whitman? And in the non-conference, these island teams, Northwest Conference, Southern California, don't really have a whole lot of non-conference D3s around them. So I think we see some crossing over quite a bit, which is kind of fun. These games, as we mentioned, can affect March, right? All the games count the same as far as like weightings into NPI formulas. It also could, as those games affect teams' NPIs, it could affect who's ranked higher, who's trying to get into a hosting position maybe. Where are we being able to fly teams into the Northwest, or do we have to go to Southern California? Can affect NCAA tournament bracketing. And we expect Whitworth and Cal Lu both to be in the mix in their conferences. Maybe they will, maybe they won't be their conference champions, but we expect them both to have strong seasons. And it's great to see these matchups in the early season and things that are going to affect March.
We already talked about Maryville and that they really seek out strong non-conference schedules. We see that again here. They'll take on Gettysburg at Hampton-Sydney as part of their tip-off tournament.
The Centennial Conference is one that I basically refuse to pick. I have no idea who's going to win that. Last year there was this quartet that basically all beat each other of Johns Hopkins and Swarthmore and Gettysburg and Franklin and Marshall. And I think to a large degree that might exist again this year. If you really, I just said I'm not going to pick it, but if you really made me pick the Centennial, I might pick Gettysburg this year. I think that they're a really interesting team to watch. I think they're definitely going to challenge in the Centennial. They could win that league. And Maryville's a team that's always looking for good games, always trying to improve that resume. They don't get the most challenge in the CCS schedule, so these non-conference games are big for them. Just a fun matchup, Gettysburg, Maryville, two teams you could see play in the NCAA tournament this year.
And now moving on to the Great Lakes Invitational portion of our schedule. Starting November 22, St. John's will take on Hope in the Great Lakes Invitational game played at Calvin.
Always an amazing tournament. Ryan works with these teams who wants to come, send out invitations, get commitments years in advance. It's amazing. I mean, he knew the programs that he was booking were strong, but it's amazing how many of these programs ended up highly ranked to start this season. St. John's and Hope both in the top 25. St. John's looks strong. Hope looks strong. But early season, you never know. Does the preseason top 25 poll, is that how things actually play out? But we get to see these types of teams play on the court. A team from Minnesota, a team from Michigan, Region 9, meeting in Grand Rapids at Van Nord Arena. If you can make it out to the GLI, you're going to see a ton of great games. If not, and you catch the live stream, do that, because we're going to see tournament quality basketball in, I was going to say essentially every matchup, but I think literally every matchup is going to be NCAA tournament quality basketball. And we get to see that right away the third weekend in November.
To highlight the point, taking a look at the D3Hoops.com top 25 poll, the preseason poll, of the 8-team Great Lakes Invitational field, 5 are ranked in that preseason top 25. 2 more were in the others receiving votes category, and just 1 was not named on any ballot. So you have 7 out of 8 got at least some top 25 consideration. And then the other, Marietta, probably was at least, the type of program that if you feel like you always have to look into or consider whether you end up voting for them or not. All right, the next matchup here at the GLI to highlight, Matt, we had the Mary game before. Now we've got Johns Hopkins taking on John Carroll at the university named after John Calvin. And of course, this is after St. John's had already played.
I will allow it. Yes. I was wondering if Ryan would do like a St. John's, Johns Hopkins, John Carroll, if all these teams would play against each other.
Right.
So we got a bunch of the Johns games going on here. But yeah, I just talked about the Centennial Conference. Hopkins is one of the teams in that mix. If Johns Hopkins wins the Centennial Conference, would not surprise anyone. Ryan Kane in year 2 as the head coach there at Johns Hopkins. probably going to be great, going to have the team competitive. Interesting to see how they are in the mix with John Carroll this year, who was a national, I'll call him a national power last year, returns most everyone from that team and is going to be strong this year as well. Definitely a team that looks top 4, top 5 worthy to start the season. So how can a team like Johns Hopkins, who is always strong and a traditional power, going to match up? Great game here at Van Noord Arena as well.
Wrapping up day one of the 2024 Great Lakes Invitational will be Emory taking on host Calvin.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say it every time for the GLI, just like great matchups here. Emory was a really young team, brings back everyone. Calvin looked like a team that could bring back almost everyone as well. Unfortunately, Jalen Overway looks like he's taking the medical red shirt this year, so they don't return quite as much as they thought that they would last year. But Calvin still has a bunch of players that had accolades last season. Uchenna Egakeza was a third-team All-America selection last year. Owen Varnado was an All-MIAA selection last year. They still have a really strong junior class, even outside of Overway, that has a lot of experience. So two teams that have been around the block here, and Emory and Calvin, going to be a great one. It's going to be a battle for 40 minutes, I think.
Moving on to the next slide, Matt, we have 3 more GLI games to highlight. We'll take these kind of 3 all at once because we've talked about all these teams. Earlier in the day, Johns Hopkins will play UW La Crosse. Emory will get their shot at John Carroll. And then to wrap up the entire event, St. John's takes on Calvin.
Yeah, just as one of the most exciting matchups of the whole thing, just leaving out the Calvin matchups, I guess, Emory and John Carroll, that just looks like a top 10 potential battle there, type of a game that could be like a Final Four type preview. If you're just talking about early expectations, both teams have that ability. Will they actually get there? We don't know, but games like this are great tests. Johns Hopkins and UW La Crosse, a great one of teams that are like, hey, we're maybe just on the outside looking in as far as like top tier national conversation goes. But I think that they're both looking to break in there. If we got to February and we said UW La Crosse is a top 20 team, I would not be shocked. If we said Johns Hopkins was a top 20 team, I would not be shocked. Just the types of matchups you like to see, and to get Maryland and Wisconsin together in Michigan, super fun. St. John's and Calvin was a tournament matchup that we saw 3 seasons ago. I think they played at UW Platteville in that opening round matchup there. Calvin won that game, so St. John's maybe carrying a little bit of animosity for getting bounced from the tournament 3 years ago. I don't know if that will play into it at all. But St. John's and Calvin, 2 teams that are kind of figuring in that like top 15 zone of the national tournament or national preseason rankings here. So just a fun matchup at Calvin. All of these games can almost go any direction, and I would believe it. Again, like I said, just going to be a really fun weekend at the GLI. And I don't think there's any team at this tournament that come March you would say would be out of place in an NCAA tournament environment. Even the teams that you say are not ranked or not getting vote, a team like Marietta, right, is not going to be worse than teams that are making the tournament this year. And if they got to that point by the end of the season, you wouldn't be surprised either themselves. So just a great tournament field. Going to be a really fun event this year. I'm glad that we get to go in person, Zach.
Absolutely. Here's your other Whitman will take on Claremont Mud Scripps in a neutral court game at UC Santa Cruz. This will be part of the UC Santa Cruz Classic.
Who's going to win the Northwest Conference and who's going to win the SCIAC? I have no idea, but these 2 teams are probably both in the mix. Whitman and Whitworth seem to be going head-to-head the last several years for the league title there. Claremont Mud Scripps has been a big factor in the SCIAC. I think that they're one of the 4 teams probably that could win the league this year. Really good game. Love the SCIAC versus Northwest Conference in November and December, and we get to see one here kind of in the middle in Santa Cruz.
Circling back to 2 teams we talked about, I believe on the very first slide, Elmhurst will play at Trine. This is a rematch from a game a year ago where Trine went to Elmhurst and lost. Just looking forward to seeing these 2 teams meet up again.
Yeah, love to see CCIW versus MIAA matchups. Those are 2 conferences where the CCIW typically has had the upper hand of those matchups, but recently we're seeing the MIAA, at least at the top, gaining in strength. So teams like Trine, like Calvin, like Hobart in the top 25. This is a good matchup at Trine. I believe this is a true home game. So it's really more of a measuring stick game for Elmhurst. I think we're very confident in where Trine lies in the national picture for what they're bringing back and maybe what also they're getting injected into that program. I would be very shocked if Trine is not in some way in the national picture by the end of the season. But Elmhurst is a team that could go either way in my mind. So can they be competitive? Can they win a game like this at Trine to keep them in that kind of national conversation while they're competing for a CCIW title?
Good one here in the Northeast when Keene State takes on Williams. This is going to be part of the Williams Purple and Gold Classic.
Yeah, the first thing I think of when I see these two teams is like, oh yeah, that's an NCAA tournament Sweet 16 type of a matchup, right? Two programs that are just historically at the end of the season in the mix in their regions in that part of the country. They could both be maybe hosting a first weekend and getting into the tournament. Is that going to happen this season? I don't know. I think Keene State still returns a bunch from these last 2 seasons of more than 2 seasons of really strong play. Like they're not going to have Jeff Hunter, but they still have a bunch of other players. Octavio Brito returns, and I think he's probably going to be the team leader in a lot of ways. Williams will have to turn over their roster from a little bit. That a team that made maybe in my mind a little bit of a surprisingly strong tournament run last year that they really showed out in March, but they're a program that can continue just to rebuild and build. So love this matchup. It's one that's the type of matchup that we get to see in March, and that's what we like to highlight in these November top 50 games. Is these are like the types of matchups that we will see again come tournament play.
And Matt, we could almost take these next two in tandem too. Eastern plays Johns Hopkins. Swarthmore plays Widener. Good matchups just to see how these teams stack up against each other. But kind of Matt Commonwealth versus Centennial Conference measuring stick games. If you want to extrapolate a little bit to see how maybe things look conference to conference.
Yeah, definitely. As you said, like how do these two leagues stack up against each other? I think historically Centennial maybe has been a little bit of a stronger league, but this Eastern Johns Hopkins matchup, great one. What are both these teams going to bring into the season? Who's going to be which team is going to be expecting to kind of take that jump, stamp their position in the top 25? I think both those teams are on the cusp there. Widener was a team last year that we saw very highly rated, kind of in that top 4 overall mix last season for NCAA tournament spots. They had a very old roster last year. They had a bunch of graduate students, so they're kind of turning over maybe half of their production, somewhere around that range from last year. So can they stay nationally dominant? Can they stay nationally relevant against a team like Swarthmore, who kind of is in that position year in and year out? What is that matchup going to look like? But I do like calling out that those two, Centennial versus Matt Commonwealth. What's kind of be the dynamic kind of between the conferences there in that part of the country.
An interesting New York State game here with Oswego State taking on Nazareth November 26th, kind of wrapping up our list before it heads into a Thanksgiving break.
Yeah, Oswego State, I think, is still the SUNYAC championship contenders this year. I think that they're in position to maybe keep their title there. I like Nazareth in the Empire 8 mix, although that league I think is a little bit more tight at the top than the SUNYAC is. Maybe there's only 1 or 2 teams that could give Oswego State some trouble, but I think there's maybe like 4 or 5 teams in the Empire 8 that could challenge there for sure. Love that as kind of like a I don't know what you want to call it, like a northwestern New York battle here. I know they're not like next door neighbors, but I think they're relatively proximate there as far as if Oswego can be proximate to anyone in New York State. So kind of a fun matchup. I know there's some transition from teams going from the SUNYAC to the Empire 8. It's not Oswego State, but I think there's kind of some dynamics there between those two conferences where the teams are kind of going back and forth. So there's some cross-pollination there as well.
And the Trinity road trip continues. Here we have their game, the 29th, as part of the David Wells Classic, where they will take on Pomona Pitzer.
Yeah, I love to get these Region 10 island teams more games. We've talked about several of them already in the top half. These teams have to go out and look for quality competition. They have to travel to play it. So we see Trinity going out and playing Pomona Pitzer in kind of a unique tournament setup there, or a classic setup that we have there in Southern California. 2 teams that I voted for in my top 25. So see if those votes were legitimate. See who's going to be jockeying for position there on top 25 ballots. But again, teams I expect to be in the mix in their conferences, and teams that I would not be surprised to see get into the tournament come March.
And Matt, two teams that I feel like over the last couple of years have figured more prominently in this kind of list, but
Yeah.
the first time that we're seeing them here for the 2024 edition, and that's WPI, who will play Tufts on November 30th.
Yeah, when you're talking about NUMAC contenders, you're always talking about WPI. I don't know when the last time that they've just been completely out of the mix there. I think they're going to be in as well. Tufts is a team that routinely features in the top 25. As far as the balloting goes, they're routinely in the NCAA tournament. You're routinely winning games in the NCAA tournament. I think they were the team that knocked off NYU, who was hosting their pod last year. Just a strong matchup against teams that have always featured prominently in Region 1 and Region 2 in that part of the country just in general, and two teams that if they both won their league, you'd just be like, yeah, that makes sense. I expect to see them play in the NCAA tournament.
And it could just be a quirk of the fact that we're looking at just games played in November, because I
Yep.
don't think either one of these teams has had their profile or outlook take a downward trend. It's just, sometimes your good games may not happen to be in November.
Yeah.
All right, wrapping up with game number 50 on our list here, Matt. Trinity, Texas will play Claremont Mud Scripts. Again, in that David Wells Classic. This one will be November 30th. You talked about the unique nature here. So the David Wells Classic will feature Claremont Mud Scripts and Pomona Pitzer, as well as Trinity and Southwestern in Texas. The Friday games will be played at Pomona Pitzer. Then Saturday they cross the street, and the Saturday games will be played at Claremont Mud Script. So the way that just happens to work out is that they're true road games for Trinity in both cases, whereas they end up for Southwestern to be neutral court games. But again, we're talking about the Claremont consortium there, and I don't know that there's functionally any difference for Trinity or Southwestern in this case.
It's two different gyms, but it's a look both ways before you cross the street situation. I'm led to believe. I would love to get out there for a game, but yeah, those five colleges, I think it is, or is it six colleges? But they're all belong to a consortium, and the way that it gets separated athletically is Pomona Pitzer grouped together. They have an arena. Claremont Mud Scripts grouped together. They have an arena, and it's across the street from each other. So yeah, a neutral site game for each of those hosts. An opportunity to host the next day for each of those, and then Trinity will get to play in both arenas against both potential SCIAC champs. Two teams in the SCIAC mix at least. I know maybe Redlands will have something to say about that. Cal Lu will have something to say about that as well. But great matchups there that we're seeing Trinity playing. Great that Trinity gets to challenge themselves and play tough games like this.
So there we go. Those are our top 50 games. If you add them all up, that's 68 different teams mentioned. And again, I'm sure that there are a lot of other games that a lot of other people are looking forward to. We always have way more than 50 games we feel like we want to include in a first pass and have to whittle it down from there. So let's go. Let's start playing games, Matt.
I'm excited. This episode, every year we've done it. This is the third year we've done it. It gets me so excited. I'm always surprised at how many good matchups there are. There are a lot of good teams we didn't even mention because either, like you said, their top games don't happen to be in November. Maybe they play some of their better matchups in December, or it's like, man, yeah, we'd really like to get Case Western Reserve in here, but like there's so many other good matchups that their opponent just didn't maybe quite warrant being on this list when we have all these other good games. So there were games that we had to rule out just because like we were cutting it down to 50. There's so many good ones. There's great ones in November or December as well. Like there's the D3hoops.com Classic out in Las Vegas that always has good teams and good matchups. So great games in Christmas and holiday tournaments as well. But November, getting the season started, how many November 8 games we talked about, Zach? How many November 9 and 10? Like the first weekend's going to be tremendous. I love starting it out with like a weekend of tournaments like that. We get 3 weeks of games before Thanksgiving. I just feel like that leads to so many good November kind of tournaments and classics out there that get me excited for D3 basketball.
Absolutely. We were 14 games deep before we got out of the opening weekend,
Wow.
if you consider
Yeah.
like Friday through Sunday. So we're getting some great games right out of the gate. All right, and as we said, Matt, our regular season shows starting next week. So we're going to open up the mailbag. If you have something that you want us to address, of course, our invitation is open. If you've got a hot take or a bold prediction you want to make, you want us to highlight on the show, we'll do that. But also, if you just have a mailbag item, we'll open up the mailbag, get that going on a weekly basis. Send them in on social media. You can leave a comment on our YouTube video. We'll find it. Lots of ways to get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you and talk about what you want us to talk about.
All right, Zach, we have some people we'd like to thank here. Thanks to all the people who have joined us on this Division III basketball journey through our Patreon page. If you want to go to patreon.com/D3 Datacast and join us, we'd really appreciate it. It helps us produce these episodes. It helps us keep D3Datacast.com ad-free. That's the place where we display D3 team ratings, efficiency ratings, team NPI data coming up for this year, the first year of NPI. We've been doing it for football. We're going to release it for men's and women's basketball. We're not displaying ads on that website, thanks in large part to people supporting our work here on Patreon. We really appreciate it. Whether you're doing the $3 good job team tier or the $5 great job team tier, that's awesome. If you can't or don't want to support us financially at this time, if you want to just hit subscribe on our channel, that helps us out a ton. We're getting really close to some thresholds where YouTube will allow us to generate revenue for these episodes. So we'd love to hit those at some point this season, but hitting subscribe does help us out a little bit. And also, if you could just share the episode, if you have someone else who's interested in Division III athletics, Division III basketball, men's basketball in particular, what we cover, share the episode, share the show, either on your social media page, on your Facebook page, whatever helps. Sharing our episodes. We love to reach more Division III fans. One of the reasons we have created this is because there's only so many people who talk about Division III basketball, right? Like D3Hoops.com does a great job. Hoopsville does a great job. QCast does a great job. But we just, we want more places for D3 chatter. We like to talk about D3. So we like to make these shows for other people who like to hear about D3 and hopefully talk about a bunch of the teams and the players along the way. So really appreciate these folks for helping us out on Patreon. And if you'd like to join, check out the links below for some more information.
Well said, Matt. Looking forward to a great season. And one more thing.
Good job, team.